You don't have to bend over to me. You should be able to just talk. You shouldn't right now. So I told him to turn it Pledge of Allegiance.
So should we get started, Don? Good morning. We want to go ahead and get started. We'll start now. We plan on ending up at about 10 o'clock this morning. My name is Dale Heisel. I'm a past chairman of the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce, and they have asked me this morning to moderate this session. We're going to start the morning with the Pledge of Allegiance. Could you please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This morning's meeting is being hosted by the Salina Chamber of Commerce and AT&T, and representing AT&T, I'm not sure if she's here, is Katie Capole. Well, she's not here, but we still appreciate AT&T hosting. Our format this morning is going to be that we are going to have you write your questions down. There's pad and pencil on your chairs or close to you. Write those down. Someone will pick the question up, and then we will read the question to the legislator, and they will answer. So in your question, please state what legislator you want to address the question, and then we will allow them to answer, and then we will move on. Hopefully this process will allow us to get through as many of your questions as possible before we have to adjourn this morning. So I want to start out by introducing our legislators. We have Representative Steve Johnson of the 108th District, Representative Diana Dirks of the 71st District, and Representative J.R. Clays of the 69th District. Senator Tom Markey of the 24th District was unable to attend this morning. He had a prior commitment. There's a state Republican convention where he is participating in, so he's not able to come. So I'm going to open up the meeting by allowing our legislators to make opening comments, and we'll start out with Representative J.R. Clays.
Good morning. First off, big thank you to the folks at the Salina Chamber, AT&T, and of course Dale for moderating here today. Really appreciate it, and of course for everyone coming out here today. Looking forward to the questions. A little about what I do up in Topeka. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. We're the ones who write the budget on the House side. I also serve on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee. And then I am the chairman of the Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee. So we oversee the budgets for the Kansas Department of Transportation, and then our public safety agencies, the KBI, the Kansas Highway Patrol, the National Guard, and the Department of Corrections. A little about what bills I've been working on. I'll just go through a quick list since we have about 5 minutes. I have been working on a change of commission expansion to elections. We've had a hearing on that bill. I've also worked on a concealed carry in public buildings fix for the city county building here in Salina. Right now we have our courts on the 3rd floor, and the way that the concealed carry law is written, it would require us to secure the entire building as opposed to being able to keep that 3rd floor secure while allowing concealed carry on the other 2 floors. So that is expected to move forward. It's had a hearing and passed through the Federal and State Affairs Committee. I have a bill on children and seniors that edits the Grandparent as Caregivers Act, and that would allow for grandparents who are taking the place of foster parents for their grandkids, for those parents to receive free and reduced school lunch for their kids. In taxation, I then have a bill that I've been working on with several others that deals with TIF districts and star bonds. And what that would do is it would allow for TIF districts to include 65-plus-year-old buildings, so historic buildings, assist with the renovation of rehabilitation of places like Salina's downtown, and then also other small towns who are wanting to use the resources and the infrastructure that they already have instead of spending money on building strip malls out by the interstate would be one of the examples I'd use. In appropriations, I also introduced a bill that adds KBI to the DROP program. The DROP program is something that we did for the Kansas Highway Patrol that's kind of a pilot program. And what it does is it allows someone for the last 5 years after they're eligible for retirement, if they continue working for those 5 years, their capers that they would have received during that time is placed into an account, and then at the end of that 5-year period, they receive a lump sum payment. It's to encourage people who have the most experience to stay on the road, to stay out there as troopers. We had a pretty serious trooper shortage that we're addressing. We were down to 399 troopers with authorization for 510, so that's a pretty serious deficit. We had about 50 eligible for retirement, and only 6 were graduating the class over here in Salina. We then passed a rank and pay plan that increased the pay for our troopers by about 10%, and that has resulted in the last class being 20, and the next class looking like it's going to be closer to 40. So we are solving some problems as they come at us. In the latest budget, I inserted a proviso that increases the pay for our corrections officers. Our corrections officers will receive a 2.5% raise. That's about $2.45 million that we allocated towards raises. That's to address turnover. Did some work with Representative Johnson here on that, so I'll throw some credit his way on working for those folks over there in Ellsworth who are working at the correctional facility there. Also in the budget, I added a proviso that adds pharmacy to the student loan repayment program. We had a little trouble over at Salina Family Healthcare recruiting a pharmacist, and I think it's important that we have that as an option. It did get stripped out by the Senate, but we have another opportunity in April to try to get that in there with some more information for our senator friends who didn't understand what was happening with that particular proviso. So we'll try to educate and get that done. As far as the KBI is concerned, we also authorized a rank and pay plan for them. They had some pretty serious issues with recruiting and turnover there as well. So we have them aligning with the Kansas Highway Patrol pay plan. There is some intermingling between those agencies where people do move back and forth, so we do want to make it so it's not a step down to move from the Kansas Highway Patrol to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. Also, just some administrative issues. I was able to get a unmanned aircraft systems position in KDOT Aviation established with Secretary Mike King. That's to help folks over at K-State Polytechnic. They've been asking for that for about 3 years from the administration. and weren't getting anywhere with the governor and the folks over there who were pretty obstinate on that issue. But I think we broke through, and we have that position being hired for now. And then there will be another announcement that will relate to some facilities out at K-State Polytechnic in Salina related to that. I'll kind of stop there because I think I covered most of the items, but there are a few others, and I'll probably just cover those as we answer questions. And again, thanks for being here.
It's my turn. Hi, everybody. I, too, would like to thank AT&T and the Chamber for allowing us to come here and answer some of your questions. I sat up till about midnight last night putting all my notes together, and they're sitting on the kitchen counter. So I will be punting today. I don't have all the bill numbers, and I told my husband, don't ever let me do that again. Okay. I serve, of course, some of my committees had shifted this for this session. I sit on the Elections Committee, the Veterans Committee, and also Ag. In agriculture, a lot of the focus this session so far has been on water conservation, the alkali. Oh, there it is. Okay, we're trying to preserve water and to because it's one of our biggest assets. And without water, we have no agriculture. Actually, we have no city life. So there's been a lot of focus on there. Served on a subcommittee on ag on noxious weed control. We want to make sure that there's a whole new list of weeds, of course, which is on my paperwork at home, that we're looking at eradicating and making sure that our crops are secure and that the weed does not take over. I had made mention of an ag committee that, when we were dairy farming, we had the musk thistle, and I'm sure anybody who's been in agriculture has always taken their little buckets and a shovel every time they went out to the pasture and tried to dig them up. In fact, ours, when we first bought our farm, I'll share this with you, when we bought our farm, the weed control officer came pulling into my driveway and said, what are you going to do about your musk thistle? Well, I had never seen a musk thistle. I said, what's that? He says, let me show you. And unfortunately, I thought they were really beautiful purple blooms, but it was something that we didn't want in our pasture. Something that I brought up in committee in that fact is that, as farmers in agriculture, we are trying to control those who, of this noxious weed. But one day, this was many years ago, we took our kids up to Worlds of Fun, and we drove through Kansas City, and along the interstate was just a whole crop of musk thistle, and here we are at home trying to pick out every single one that we can. So this time in veterans, or in agriculture rather, we're trying to put a bill together that would make it that everyone has to take care of the musk thistles, including our highway department, just to make sure, in the cities, they don't think about it, I guess, in the metro areas as we do here at home. So that was one of the things we've been talking about, and of course the water conservation. Actually, there was only one bill passed out of elections. It was just pretty much a cleanup bill. And I proposed a bill in elections, but it never made it to a hearing. And it was just on clarity on campaigning, that if you are saying something about your opponent, that you really should be able to provide proof. If it was printed in the media or carried on the media, that you would have to also apologize to that same media source for telling, something that you really didn't have any proof. It just makes, I know I get so many complaints about election time, and people saying they're always saying such bad things about each other, and hey, you can't say too much about that, but if you're really saying something that would be derogatory and really may have some kind of a consequence, that we should be able to prove that we have done that, and this is the proof in hand. It never made it out of committee. Agriculture and elections, and of course veterans. I serve on the Veterans Committee, and we have been looking at some bills there, just what we want to do is the care homes for our veterans. We want to make sure that they have all of the services that they need. And every time an event comes up that draws attention to what we need to be working on, we were going to try and propose a bill. To be real honest with you, the first 6 weeks of this session in the committees that I'm on, we really haven't covered a whole lot. So I really don't have much to say. Most of my conversation today will be on the budget because that's where a lot of the focus was at. When I was not serving on having a meeting in elections, because we only met twice, one time, and then finally the last one, and our chair wasn't there, so we didn't do anything. I sit in on the education committee, so I do have some valuable information in that regard. I still, even though I am no longer on the education committee, I am trying my best to keep informed so that I'm able to answer some questions that my constituents may have. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. I do have a copy of my newsletter that has some information, and what I would appreciate, those of you who would like to receive, I usually send out an electronic version of my newsletter. I try to keep it very much up to date, and I would appreciate if you would like to receive it to please give me your email address, and I'll put you on my email newsletter list. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Dirks, and I will echo my colleagues' thanks to all of you and our sponsors. Issues, most of the work has actually gone on outside of committees, as Representative Dirks has mentioned, and trying to pay attention to some of the keys. There are some things we should look at. I'm not sure we will look at. As I look around the room, Medicaid might be an issue that some folks are interested in. There, I got him to look up. Anyway, and I don't know that we'll have a chance to have a good and open discussion on that issue. Number of points, but I think that those are the type of issues that bear discussion, at least, to try and figure out where we want to go. Two things that we have to do, in my opinion, is address the structural balance in the budget and deal with the issues of education, and specifically those pointed out in the court decision that came out. Those will eventually happen in some fashion. I hope that we do them sooner rather than later. At this point, we'll be moving into our turnaround time frame, which is when bills are out of the first chamber and go to the other one. So it's going to be into March before we get on that, and that does concern me. Nonetheless, to try and have solutions ready are the key. Representative Dirks, I know, is working on education. I don't know that I have those solutions, but I look forward to continuing to hear from you on what things need to happen. On other problems, Representative Clays was kind to share credit, but there are a number of cases where employees have not had raises for a long time, and that will create issues, and it'll create issues in times at any point when we hit unemployment in the 3 to 4% range. But his work is the one that identified and made those public safety positions stick. Save without him, I'm not sure that that would have stayed through the budget process. So that was really key to address any part of that particular thing. On the tax issue, I'm very concerned about the tax lid for local entities. It's not something we have to address. It is something I hope we address. And on that, I've enjoyed working with some of the local folks and have been trying to work with the Farm Bureau folks on the two sides of that issue. And as I identify it, what needs to happen with the tax lid is look at a schedule that works, first of all, for budgeting and elections if we have to go that route. Look at the exemptions that are necessary. I think particularly public safety has been overlooked on that list, and there may be other things. And then look at an index that actually works. CPI isn't a good fit, but if you use some measure that's relevant to our governments, I think it's possible. And then I would also recommend going to a 5-year rather than a 1-year average. The reason I look at those, I don't think repeal is possible with the ability to override a veto, and making sure that it's at least something that is workable is a goal that I have. The bigger goal on tax, of course, is coming up with a balance. As we look at the budgets that we pass, my Ag Budget Committee is boring to talk about. It's just keeping the trains running on the tracks, going through those details. And in that, we see various fee sweeps that are recommended. We actually removed all of them in our committee. They were all put back on in the larger committee and in the final budget. But that is looking for ways to find revenue. And I won't say that there are not opportunities on the spending side to continue to cut, and I think it is always important for us to stay vigilant on that. However, many folks have had a couple of terms to look at how to make cuts. They have not been found, or they have at least not been passed. And if there is not a spending solution, then we actually have a revenue problem. And that's what I see in the budgets that we are dealing with. Again, I think the recent study, the A&M study that was the efficiency study, could yield some positive results that might give some savings. The ones in the limited committees that I look at are not really large, and they're not particularly specific, and some of them are out in 2021. Nonetheless, I think that's the right process, but in the short term, to make things balance, I think we're going to have to look at that again. So, if anyone has great ideas for efficiency, I think it's where we deal with it here that we actually see where those efficiencies lie. That is great. Short of that, we'll have to look at how that works to balance. I fear that discussion starts in earnest in late March and into the April time frame again when we return. And maybe I will be positively surprised, and our revenue estimates will pick up and we'll exceed them and make it through the end of the year, which wouldn't be bad, but I would rather address that problem. So that's the large one. In pensions, believe it or not, there's not that much going on. The main thing we need to address more fully is working after retirement. We have gotten fully mired in that situation. We came close to a solution, but when everything was put on the table, everyone choked, and we've got to figure out a way to simplify that and try and get it through before the end of the session. But hopefully, your input to continue to work on budget and education will get us to solutions that will be useful, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a number of questions on very similar topics. I'm going to try to combine a few of those questions into one. Some of these questions have already been hit on a little bit in the opening comments of our legislators, but let me start with one regarding Common Core. I'll just read the question here. Knowing it may adversely affect AP and IP programs, what is your opinion on the proposal in the legislature to eliminate the Common Core in schools? Another one, very related, talk about all school initiatives, anti-Common Core, vouchers, penalties for teachers, and harmful book content. Whoever wants to take that, and maybe we'll rotate on. It wasn't addressed to any one of you.
Thank you, whoever asked that question. Okay. How do I describe this? I was in, my one committee ran over, and so elections, the one day that I should have been there, ran over, and I got in on the very tail end. This is in reference to the Common Core meeting that they had. I do not have the bill number with me, it's still at home. But my thought is, let me explain to you what happened. That particular day, we had a group of individuals who we always welcome everyone to come to the State House, but this particular day, there was a whole group of visitors there who were advocates for religious freedom, and they certainly, can quantify that they, have every right to express their opinions, as all of us do. That particular day, they decided to wander into education. That's the day that they discussed the Common Core. What happened in education that day reflects clear back to last year. They have been trying for the last 3 years to eradicate the Common Core standards. But on this particular bill, it also mentions that that we will no longer accept federal funding that has anything to do with education. Now, what happens with that is that it also takes away the Lexia reading program and some of those other items. And Superintendent Hall is here, and I'm sure he can help me with some of those things that would eliminate from the education system. But that particular day, they had a speaker that stood up for an hour and 45 minutes. He was supposed to just be talking about one particular subject and just spouted out and everything. And every time I think about this, I really get riled because, to me, sitting in on any type of committee, you have to have respect for your chairperson. You have to have respect for those committee members. And this particular individual was screaming. We could hear them clear outside. And then the chair allowed the audience to clap, which is a no-no. And I'm sure he was just trying to do crowd control. So a lot of that discussion on the Common Core. You know, I have always been an advocate simply because these standards have been set in place, and it drew a lot of bad criticism in regards to what it's doing. But it was an avenue for standards for our kids. They're just standards. I'm proud of the schools that we have in the state of Kansas, and Salina is just an epitome of that we have proper education, and now in one fell swoop, we no longer, it passed out of committee, it still has to pass on the floor. It may have an opportunity to do that. But the thing that bothers me the most, and I'll be real honest with you, is the fact that we have nothing to take its place. So what do? We're going to eliminate something that's already in place, and with the funding that we have in the state as of today, we are now going to be turning down any type of federal funding to help educate our kids. To me, that is a travesty. We fight so hard to protect our children and give them every advantage, and in one fell swoop, in one education committee, with a group of rather hostile people, they had allowed this one man to talk about it, and this was a resolution. So there were no conferees proponents, there were no conferees opponents. So this was just done arbitrarily, and it eradicates everything that we have worked so hard for our kids. Some of the other things that have come through education, since we're talking about Common Core, I'll tell you some of the other things that they've been doing in education that just passed out of committee was due process for those in community colleges. That's another one. The big one was House Bill 2504 concerning redistricting of school districts, which would have cut the number of districts in half. That one drew the biggest crowd. Can you imagine having one district per county? Now, there's a limit of, it has to have, if you have 10,000 population in there, it doesn't affect you. But the gentleman, the Representative Bradford, who proposed this particular piece of legislation, is from Leavenworth, and Leavenworth is exempt because Leavenworth is a military base. So go figure that one out. So I'll pass and let somebody else address this as well. But I will give you additional information, and I do apologize that I don't have all the facts and figures in that with me, but I will be happy to get any information to you in that regard. It is still, at this point, had not been on the floor. It just passed out of committee.
I knew that Representative Dirks would know the play-by-play on how everything happened. I heard about how things happened in the committee and that the process was perhaps broken. That may be an understatement in working through that. The Common Core theme has been bubbling for years. I had people ask me about it right off the bat in the rotunda, and I am not for repealing the Common Core. I've been consistent in that and told them that. I'm not sure where the bill goes from here. The The consolidation bill, thankfully, was seen as flawed pretty early on, and I don't think it actually goes anywhere. I'm not as sure on this one. So before, when the Education Committee was different, the concept wasn't able to make it out of committee. So now it's able to make it out of committee. I'm not confident about where it goes once it gets on the floor. If the momentum will be high enough to carry it anywhere, I think not, but I will worry about that one. And so it bears continued effort, I think, to make sure, and I think the consequences are grave enough that we have to continue to follow what, if anything, can happen on that particular bill. On that and other issues, when I see some things with others, it can help point out in myself. Whenever I or someone is convinced we have all of the answers, then we are usually part of the problem. And when there's one way that'll fix everything, I usually need to try and find just a little more about what's going on in that process. And that seems to be some of the theme behind this has got to go. And I try and figure out why, and I have not yet been able to figure that out. So on that and the content issue, I believe we are far better off to let our school boards and other entities decide how they're going to do the job of instructing. And guess what? Issues will come up, just as they come up on the state level and others. And I have confidence in the ability of those groups to address those issues. If there is a wrong material that is shown, I think that will be much more effectively, appropriately, and quickly addressed right there in the school than in other places. And I don't feel that, anyway. So I'm not sure how much more we'll chat about that one. I don't know that it has as many legs. I think that the Common Core one will die again in the process, but it has to die in the House. I think it has a better chance of making it in the Senate with some of the current dynamics in the Senate that is there. So that will give Representative Dirk something to continue to work on as well, and I'll look forward to working with her to make sure that that holds together.
Can you read the second part again? I don't think I caught all of the
Okay.
items that were discussed there. Consolidation and then,
Well, there are a number of questions on this. It must be a hot topic.
I'll just start talking.
Well,
You let me know when to stop.
I'll just read a couple and get you. How does changing the state education standard to not include AP and IP courses help
interested in
kids,
that.
students?
You had that second question that had multiple bills, I think.
Okay, I think I know which one you're talking about.
Well, I'll
Talk about all school initiatives, anti-Common Core, vouchers, and penalty for teachers and harmful book content. Is that the one you were thinking?
okay, yeah, that's it. I thought those were two separate ones, so I assumed that was the issue with Johnson. Was that Johnson County, where there was something that was left on a wall or something? People were very upset. Okay, well. Oh, and then, yeah, opt-in, opt-out. Hadn't really thought of that one. As far as the consolidation, I'll just start in kind of reverse order here. As far as the consolidation issue, that was ill-conceived, I think is probably the best word for it. I think the idea of having some sort of incentive for consolidating school districts where it makes sense for those local districts is a good thing, and we used to have that. We don't anymore, so you don't see it happening as much, but I think the idea of just simply having county lines be drawn and saying that that's your school district doesn't take into account where schools are located, the distance to those schools for the students, and then the communities of interest that surround the schools and their desire for local control. You'll see school districts merge, and oftentimes it's not one district merging with a second, it's three of them turning into two, or five turning into three, or something like that. And that really requires a lot of local input. It requires buy-in from local communities. So I don't support that. As far as the punishing teachers for material, I think there are already laws on the books as far as what can and can't be shown to minors and how that process works. I haven't looked at the opt-in, opt-out bill. I don't know. I'll just admit I don't know on that one. As far as Common Core is concerned, we're very close to being at the point where we create a new set of standards anyway. And I think that it's probably most important that we send the message that we don't want a top-down solution for our kids, that we do want that to be something that starts at the local level, that our teachers have a tremendous amount of input in, and that our state school board assembles with students in mind. So I would just leave it at that.
Thank you. To stay on the school topic a little bit, let me read this question. The budget was passed without reference to the Supreme Court decision to increase public school funding. What will be done to make adjustments due to the Supreme Court decision? Another related question that says something very familiar says, what is the general feeling of the House about coming in compliance with the Supreme Court's order,
I already have the mic, so I guess I'm up. As far as the Supreme Court is concerned, the equity portion of the lawsuit came up again, so I think that that's what we're addressing in the current decision. The last time that we had this portion of the lawsuit come up was 2 years ago. I did vote in favor of that, so I think, based on record, I would be in favor of coming into compliance both with the court's opinion and especially if it results in raises for our teachers, which is exactly what the last one did. In Salina, 4.8% was the average across the board for our teachers. So I'm hoping that it does something similar to that. I think the number that has been put out there has been anywhere from 54 million to 71 million. So we'll see where that number lies and how that becomes calculated and what else is shoved into the bill. But at this point, I would say that I'm in favor of coming into compliance, but I'm more in favor of writing a new system for school finance, and that's what the block grants were all about. The block grant was designed to create a 2-year bridge so that we could create a system for school finance, pilot that system, and then implement it in 2018. And so I would favor continuing along that road. Right now we are under a block grant system. There is no formula per se. So it would make the most sense to get working on a system of school finance that works for our students and our communities, founded on local control and putting dollars in the classroom.
Well, it comes back to what I said previously, that before you stop something, have a replacement. It's like stopping your car on a green light. You're not going to go unless you have some place to go and know where you're going. And this is exactly what happened with the block grant situation. The Kansas Supreme Court decision was announced before the budget vote in the House. I'm standing right here well, I'm sitting actually, but here I am. I'm before you today to say that I voted against the budget for the very reason it wasn't complete. We had no essence of how we were going to do the school finance piece. And if you're looking at it, it says, the ruling on the Gannon lawsuit stated, without a constitutionally equitable school finance system, the schools in Kansas will be unable to operate beyond June 30th, 2016. As a parent and a legislator and a member of this community, I would feel that maybe we've better find out where the money's coming from to educate our kids. Are we going to allow the school doors to close because we're not addressing that very issue? I know that the budget had a lot of pieces in it, a lot of things, that were needed to be addressed. But this is another example of trying to do something too quickly. We do have time left in the session. They want to shorten the session. I think one thing is to show that we can actually get done on time. But the biggest thing is that we have to do our job and do it diligently and have all the numbers, all the ducks in a row. And that was why I just could not understand why we had to rush this. No provisions were made for this item. Experts estimate that the shortfall needed to fund the ruling will be approximately $54 million. And in the state of what we have right now in our financial situation for our state, we better find out where we're going to get this $54 million without robbing Peter to pay Paul. The Gannon ruling, I have a couple of notes here for you. It revives portion of the court gives the legislature two options. Revive portions of the old unfair formula that treated wealthy districts as poor and poor districts as wealthy, and put in new money according to the newest property valuations. Find another funding system that meets equity without running afoul of adequacy, which the court has not ruled on. These are notes from leadership. I'm just giving you their perspective here. The Kansas Supreme Court, in issuing the ruling on the ongoing Gannon versus school finance case, the court says that the legislature does not meet the equity requirements. It will lift its stay of the district's court order, and because in the opinion of the court, no constitutionally valid school finance system exists. I believe that we brought that up the last time when they did the block grant. We had nothing to take its place. We put something simply together, which also allowed silos that the governor could extract funds from. So this is a situation that we are faced now in our state. This is a very serious, serious problem. So I'll let Representative Johnson continue on that one.
Thank you, Representative. So we will disagree on part of this one and try and get through some of the details that are there. For the education, on how the House feels, boy, that is mixed. So I'll come back to that one, but I'll start with the budget piece. And how do you handle the budget? So the final action vote was Thursday in session at 11. The announcement is Thursday morning at 9:30. The budget process started in November. Several of us continued meeting through the summer, looked at consensus revenue estimates, which were missing grossly. November finally started to get a little bit of traction about how far off they were. That meant changes were going to have to be made. What are those changes and what do they look like? How do you try and get it together? I don't always agree with all of my colleagues. I don't always agree with our appropriations chair, but I actually think he did a good job leading that process. There are some things that were broken and some things that were going to fail if we stayed on the same track. He got on the job before we got there, and he fought very hard from day one in January to make sure that he was addressing what issues there were. Now, there's a couple of approaches. One is let stuff fail, and if we can blow enough things up, perhaps we make the big changes that we need to make, which is not necessarily a bad strategy. So it may be painful, but it's not necessarily a bad strategy. The other one is how do you try and keep some of the trains on the tracks that you can, and I think that was the goal of the appropriations chair. That process continued as quickly as he could drive it while letting everybody participate in those discussions. And on Wednesday, we had our full debate and passed the budget. I think there are a lot of good things in that budget. There's nothing that precludes us from taking up another budget bill immediately. That committee is exempt and it can introduce a new bill at any time to address any particular issue. In my opinion, the best strategy was to pass that budget for the other entities that were served in that and then continue to move forward and say, okay, now we have to figure out what is the amount that we do. At 9:30, I was with KASB, the Superintendents Association, and the Wichita Schools folks. We were scrambling through that thing, trying to get a handle on what does this say. I can tell you I didn't know by 11, and those three groups were not entirely sure by 11. But that was not enough for me to change my vote to say, okay, I'll throw the rest of the work away so that we can better address this. It does not decrease my zeal to address that issue, but that is how I felt about that particular budget vote. Where the House will come out, I fear we'll sit on our thumbs for too long from folks who want to do nothing, but then eventually scramble to come up with some solution that works. The potential consequence of shutting down schools is so dire that surely everyone will come together to meet that. I'm pretty confident that we will in the House. Sensitivities are a little higher in the Senate at the moment, and getting things through there is a little more challenging. I think Diana did lay out the issues and what has to be addressed very well. And I'd say that we have a minor disagreement on that part in the process, and I'd offer those two sides to you. Thank you.
Staying on the same line as the budget, I'll just read a couple of these questions. How can we have a balanced budget if we continue to relieve KDOT of funds, along with allowing KDOT to borrow additional money, also borrowing from CAPERS? Another question very similar. Why does the state borrow from CAPERS and then make adjustments to it? And a third question, when will the administration stop stealing, I'll use that term in the note, from other funds to balance the budget?
I have plenty of opinions. The CAPERS piece is a very effective one at getting folks concerned and whipped into action. Doing nothing on CAPERS would have allowed the governor to allot CAPERS as he would allot any other item of the budget. So you could skip payments. The Senate started with a proposal that, well, we'll give you 2 years to pay it back. And the House said, no way. We are not open-ended. We'll give you 3 months, but we're going to remove your allotment authority. You can't just take the money out. It must be paid, and any late payments have to be paid at the full 8% interest. So, from a strictly CAPERS standpoint, the funding process is neutral from a strictly CAPERS standpoint. The then decision is, do you force allotments in April by taking away the power now and deal with those changes from now to budget year end, or do you provide the option of an allotment in April or in August where there might be more time to react to that? I'm not sure what the best policy is there. But from a strictly CAPERS standpoint, it is neutral. The borrowing in CAPERS, I don't know, I can talk about this, but I don't think folks believe what I have to say, so it may not be relevant. The borrowing in CAPERS was not new debt and was not a change in payment schedule. It was a change in refinancing that fraction of the debt because we happened to have a low interest rate environment to get a lower rate than what we owe ourselves. So that saves us about $30 million a year. Didn't have to be done, but I'll take $30 million where I can get it to do other types of things, particularly where I don't have a cost that's directly associated. So not new debt. I don't know exactly what our debt is in CAPERS. It is around $8 billion. I can't be certain of that. I can be certain it is still greater than $1 billion, which was the amount that was turned into a hard liability through the borrowing. KDOT is a different story. Again, while interest rates are low, I would support financing projects that need to be done. However, that is new debt. And I need to make sure that we are doing new projects that then allows. We are in absolutely a maintenance mode. We will need to build new roads now. We will need to build new roads in 10 years. And I want to make sure in that maintenance mode we have an ongoing plan that works. So I am very concerned about borrowing in KDOT and sweeping from KDOT. That part does not work for me. And there are other sweeps, not as egregious as KDOT because it is the largest amount, that very much concern me in the budget. Those are the opinions that I have relating to the borrowing and spending piece. It doesn't work. Again, it shows that if we are doing those borrowing efforts, we do have a revenue problem.
I would just like to mimic what Representative Johnson says. I did support his amendments in regards to capers, even though I didn't vote on the whole budget bill, but I did vote on his amendments because he put out every single effort that he possibly could have to protect capers. And when you're in a bad situation, you have to sometimes come with perhaps not the fullest of intent of doing good, but you can only go so far. So his efforts should really be commended. I really have to say that. In regards to KDOT, you all know how I feel about that. Again, that's what referenced earlier, robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, right now I think every single budget is up for grabs. We have to find the money somewhere. If our revenue sources continue to be a deficit, it's a situation that we're just going to have to deal with. I don't think there is any one magic solution. We just have to work it out piece by piece and see what we can come up with.
Excellent question. We do unfortunately move a lot of dollars out of the state highway fund and into the general fund for general fund spending. The capers questions were clearly answered by Representative Johnson. I don't think I could possibly add anything to that. But as far as the state highway fund is concerned, we are at $1.2 billion in bonding over the T-Works program. We were estimated to hit $1.8 billion, so we are still a solid $600 million below that projection. A lot of what's going on with KDOT and the dollars that we send to it is that sales tax revenues continue to increase, and of course a portion of that is automatically put into the state highway fund. The state highway fund funds more than highways. It funds the highway patrol in its entirety and several other agencies. But what we've done is we've seen through probably the past 3 years, as oil prices have dropped dramatically, we're seeing that the bids that are coming in on projects are coming in far lower than we had anticipated. And when you build a 10-year highway program and fuel prices, at the gas pump, we were upwards of $3.50, and today you can go get $1.49 gas. You can just see that the precipitous drop in those fuel prices, and that of course affects asphalt as well, and that means that our bids are coming in generally 25 to 30% below where they were projected at the outset of the program. Well, if you're seeing those dollars drop and the need for that construction dropping, along with the materials actually lasting longer, then the system of finance for the road system is literally overfunding what is necessary for KDOT to operate. Let's set aside the part where the bonding was done and then taken out in the last year. Generally speaking, the system needs to be evaluated. The way that we finance our road system, the way that it is systemically overfunded, at least in recent years, and perhaps 10-year projects aren't the way that 10-year plans aren't the way that we should go. Perhaps we should do 6-year plans with a 3-year rolling update. It would make a lot more sense to do something like that, because then you can take into account what the current dynamics are with your sales tax revenues that are put into the program. Gas tax, of course, is the other portion of it. That's constitutionally untouchable. But as you're able to go through and look at what's happening with fuel prices, what's happening with the bids, what's happening with the projects that we need to do, how much are those projects costing, going 10 years out and saying, I can predict right now in 2010, well, not right now, but back when it was done, saying in 2010, I can predict what's going to happen with pricing in 2020. I don't think any of us have that Nostradamus type capability, and so we should have a system that's more frequently updated, and I think a 6-year plan with 3-year rolling updates and then the 25-year plan that the federal highway system requires is probably a better way to go. We have a top 5 highway system, and we want to continue to have that. And I think the next stage of this is as we start developing that new transportation program, whether it be a 6-year or a 10-year, if we continue to do it that way, we need better data on what we need to accomplish with our state highway program. So we need to understand what the local needs are, but then we also need to understand what does it take to maintain this road system to the quality that we expect. And I don't know about your experiences on our interstate system, but we have a fantastic interstate system. We need to continue to grow the new modernization projects that we're doing, but we also need to do it wisely and taking into account that taxpayer dollars are not endless, and that they don't necessarily need to be stovepiped into KDOT for their spending. Instead, we should know what we need to spend to maintain the quality of the system. We should be able to update that frequently, and then we're not putting ourselves in a position where we have overfunded the system and sweeps are taking place continually. That sort of doesn't take into account what happened last year, which is a bonding cap was removed, we left town, and then the bonds that were put out there were far in excess of what we were told they would be. And that's what happens when a cap is removed. So in the 2017 budget, I put the cap back on. We have a 19% cap for bonding for KDOT. It was put back in the 17 budget where it would have previously not existed to put a stop to them going out and bonding in excess of what oversight had been told. So we definitely want to take into account the best use of taxpayer dollars throughout the system. I think this one-time bonding thing was a poor decision made by the executive branch. It was 440 million, and they are interest-only payments until the last 5 years. So far after these roads are being replaced, the principal will finally be paid on those. And it's that kind of thing that, that the bonding cap is intended to stop. And knowing now what if we had known then, that never would have happened. The legislature's desire to be circumvented like that is the appetite for that is not there. And what they did, it won't happen in 2017 because we put the cap back on. But I think that a trust factor existed there that probably has been damaged.
Okay, I'll ask another question. This one may be a very short answer by each one of you, but it says, do we have a revenue problem, or do you believe we have a spending problem?
Do I get the mic? Oh. Yay. Do we have a revenue problem or a spending problem? Both. We have both a revenue problem and we have a spending problem. I was elected in 2012, and our 2013 budget was about $5.9 billion. It's now about 6.3. That's a $400 million increase over 4 years. So clearly, we have spent a good amount of money over the course of those years. As far as revenue is concerned, clearly we have a revenue issue to match that level of spending. So I would say that we have both, and that there is some room to meet in the middle on both. And I think that's why the A&M study, the Alvarez and Marcel study that gives us some ideas of efficiencies in government will go a long way towards helping that. We've already seen a lot of the low-hanging fruit go into implementation in corrections, increasing the good time credits. Those things, those are going to reduce our costs overall. Millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars being saved by doing things like that. We just passed that on Thursday, I believe, out of the House, and it'll go over to the Senate. But we have several other bills. Several of the things, in fact, a majority of them, just require the agency to agree to do it. And so far, we've had some great agency cooperation in that. We're going to save millions of dollars a year just in agencies deciding to implement some of the processes, procurement being one of the primary ones where we're seeing a lot of duplication and a lot of administrative bloat and overhead. Some of that coming down. It's a tremendous amount of savings for the taxpayers, and it's really meaningful. So we'll continue to work through that, and I think that those are the things that are going to really have an impact on where our spending and our revenue starts to meet in the middle kind of as we go forward.
I certainly agree that it's a combination of both. spending and the money that we come in. I asked one of our I lost my place. Looking here from Legislative Services, they gave me, I wanted to have some information on this because I don't sit on the Budget Committee, and so therefore I'm not privy to all of the, and they hand us this stack of papers, you know, we're supposed to understand it. So I asked Legislative Services, would you please put it in plain English so I can understand all these numbers? It says the ending balance. The projected ending balance for fiscal year 2016 is $32 million, or 0.5% of the state general fund expenditures, and $111.8 million, or 2%. The current year's state general fund receipts are $26 million behind November consensus revenue estimates for the year. So there you're seeing that we are, in fact, not bringing enough money in. Taking this into consideration, the ending balance would be $6 million in 2016 and $58 million in 2017. This is both fiscal year 2016 and 2017 ending balances assume that the monthly receipt will meet the projections for each month going forward. And this is what's been happening. They have not been meeting those projections. So it's a combination. I would say most of it is a revenue source. And then trying to budget to meet what the revenues are. And this is what's is such a complex issue when you're dealing with a budget proposal for the next fiscal years. I don't envy those who sit on the budget committee because I know what they're faced with. It's just the fact that we need to have the revenues coming in and wisely choose what we put on the budget. And right now, I don't see that happening.
And the short answer is both. The immediate larger problem is a revenue problem. And I talked about that a little bit before. To the spending piece, we can find things where we can do better, cheaper, et cetera. And I'll just give an example and they're small. I find things that are maybe thousands of dollars. I don't find millions of dollars. I'd love to be, well, not entirely true. Capers is changed by something approaching a couple $100 million a year in total changes. But when I sit at my desk on the house floor, I have this fancy phone contraption that kind of gets in the way. And I'm not going to do a conference call there. And I used to have an old, just a key push button phone, et cetera. And there was a blue light hooked up that I could actually see when somebody calls. And now when I try to reach somebody, you can't tell that the silly thing is ringing, which is the only thing that you need. I don't know how much we spent on that. But I'm sure somebody said, you know, those phones are out of date, and we really need a better system. And somebody probably was good and truly believed the product they were selling and got that. I don't know how much we spent on that, but if I could trade it today, I'd take my old phone back because it did what I needed. And more than that, I wonder how much that cost. So I want to look for those types of decisions, and I want us to look for those types of decisions where the greatest thing is brought, and I ask enough questions to make sure, is that worth your dollars? Because sometimes it's not. And that's what I do have to be careful of. So for me to say I don't have a spending problem, I think would be short-sighted of me also. But the greatest problem I face right now, I believe, is a revenue problem as I look at the budget. Thank you.
Okay, another question I have. Why would the state government impose a limit on how much local governments can raise taxes?
I can't give a full answer, and this is where I'm being what I was criticizing earlier, where I think I have all the answers and I don't. But I think that the government made that decision to get one more vote in the Senate to get a tax bill out last year. And I think that's largely it. But there's clearly enough people behind the idea to continue to give it legs and to have given it legs in the first place. But that was one of those items added in that process on a floor. The Senate has a different dynamic where you need 63 votes to pass something in the House. You can't ask too many people what they've got to have to vote. But when you need 21 in the Senate, we got an exemption for Christmas tree farms and a property tax lid on counties. And that wound up getting us to 21. I think there's one other thing, but that was the most egregious that's there. Sure, I'd love to say that I could protect you from taxes on all of the fronts. And I'm very concerned about property taxes. I'm very concerned about property taxes in light of the income tax and the pressure that that will put on it. However, my feeling is, again, local control. Their decision, their responsibility to look at how those numbers have to come out rather than us trying to make that control. So now there are other things that definitely go into it. I'd love to see a way to put a lid on taxes, but I have to know that I can put a lid on spending, and I don't know that. Anyway, and I think it's a little risky for us to tell other people that they have to operate in that world.
I really won't add too much more to that. I think he pretty well covered how most of us feel. It's ironic when you go to the House floor, what type of bills you're going to be faced with, and this year it just seems they're coming out of left field without really taking notice, and they're slipping things. The voucher piece, the question that you ask, I still call it a voucher, even though they're talking about tax credits. But I have noticed there are some real mean-spirited pieces of legislation coming out. There's some good legislation coming out, and there's some mediocre. And we have to determine when we're sitting there, but the first thing that we really have to determine, and I'm not going to sit up here and just quote all these numbers, my thing is how is it going to benefit the people who we serve? And you might get tired of hearing that from me, but that is really the whole purpose that I am in Topeka. And I'm sure that most of our representatives feel the exact same way. What consequences is it going to be to our community, and what benefits going to be the community? And at this point, I feel this is one of those that has to be local control.
I won't belabor it because we probably have time for another question before we have to close. So I would just say I agree with Representative Johnson's take on the issue.
In relation to sales tax, what is your opinion on the gradual elimination of sales tax on groceries?
Sounds great. I would love to do that. In fact, the first year I was up there, we had a few proposals that called upon reducing the sales tax on groceries. As far as the price tag for eliminating it entirely, it's a pretty big one. I think it's somewhere in the upper 300 million to 400 million range. Oh gosh, I'm getting the thumbs up over there. Maybe 400 and something million. Ooh, wow. So yeah, it's not an inexpensive thing to reduce, but we worked at it then. It didn't seem to have the votes at the time. I think there are a lot of people who are firmly committed to making that happen, but it's probably going to take some time. We're a little more on an island over here in Salina, so we don't get the advantage of being able to drive across State Line Road or being up in the northern tier to move into Nebraska for our groceries. So we don't have that avoidance capability like others do. So it's a little more important to us than I think it is to some individuals who are in those areas.
I won't belabor that, but I just really feel, again, it's taking care of those who live in our community, and I know that there are several that would certainly benefit by not having to have tax on groceries, and I would certainly be an advocate for that.
And I would agree with what representatives have said. So I would support a gradual reduction. I'm not sure I can get to zero based on the magnitude, but I would like to see us not be the highest, and I would love to see that at least be, back where it was before we started raising the sales tax. So if we could get that one edged below 5 somewhere, if we could even get it down to 3, I think that may be in the realm of possible, but it's maybe not soon.
I have a number of kind of random questions that we haven't addressed, and we're starting to run out of time, but I will maybe just state a couple of the questions, and then you can fill in how you want to. First one is, any chance CanCare Bridge to Health Kansas will get a hearing? Another one is, please explain why 3 medically knowledgeable representatives were removed from the Health Committee. And then I'll throw out one more, then you can pick which ones you want to address. The House Bill 2595 was discussed this week, and it seems to include language that would restrict organizations that promote healthy eating and good food choices. What is your overall understanding and position on the bill? It says House Bill 2595 was discussed this week, and it seems to include language that restricts organizations that promote healthy eating and good food choices. What is your overall understanding and position of the bill?
Well, I'm not afraid to start talking before I know what I'm going to say. So I don't know 2595, so I'll have to look that one up to see what that discussion was. I didn't hear about that discussion. On the other things, I'm not sure that we get a chance to have a good hearing on Medicaid. I would hope that we could discuss the Bridge to a Healthy Kansas. I think many people have worked hard to find a variety of solutions, and I think it's the right thing to have a hearing as well as a floor debate if we can get that done either way. The attempts at bringing it around a system are going to be marginal to have success. Appropriately, I have representatives in my committee that say when we talk about something, is it germane to Medicaid expansion and on pension topics. So obviously, if folks are looking for a way to force that discussion, we should be able to have it. So the second piece of why we're good, knowledgeable people removed from the committee, because the leadership did not want to have that discussion. That is it. Comes down to that one thing. So, interestingly enough, the Senate changes on the Health Committee have now gone the other way, while the House changes took everyone off the committee that would have a position to consider that discussion. So, how do you force that around the leadership? It is difficult, and it may be possible, but you really have to have a pretty good consensus to go around that. The likelihood of getting a consensus in the current legislative bodies, I don't know, is high enough to be able to pull that off effectively. It may be able to be kind of a nasty discussion, which we are capable of, but we need an effective discussion. So I fear it's next year. I'd love to have a different position for you, but that's what I believe.
I have had several individuals from the health industry visit me in my office here this past couple of weeks, and I would be in full support of this Bridge to Health that they're trying to put together. There have been some amendments offered during our discussion and debate on the House floor that if they could squeeze it in there to either be voted, it ended up being voted germane or non-germane, trying to put Medicaid expansion into another bill. I think we would be more successful if the attempts would be to have a standalone bill, to try and squish it into a policy piece, into another piece of legislation, would not benefit those in the health community. They have their ideas of what they need for Medicaid expansion. I'm a definite advocate for Medicaid expansion. I've voiced my opinion on that many times. But I really feel, and so do some of my colleagues, that in order to really get the type of Medicaid expansion to help our individuals in the health industry and those who participate of the patients, we're going to need to really have a standalone bill and get the forces behind it to get it passed. And there are some options being considered now, so it's not dead in the water. It's just at this point, I don't believe it's going to be able to get done this session.
It's my understanding that a version of the Can Care was heard last session. Is that right? I think so. I don't sit on those committees, so I don't really know if that was accomplished, but I think it's definitely worthy. As far as the representatives being removed, I won't add anything to that. I think that's been answered. HB 2595 was heard in House Commerce, and it basically just prevents a hodgepodge of local ordinances regarding nutritional and food labeling. I think that was brought by a group of local producers of food products who did not want to be forced to comply with differing rules in the different places that they sell their products. So the proponents were, I think their justification was essentially we'd have a nutritioning labeling issue in Great Bend and a different one in Salina and a different one in Garden City, and trying to sell our products would become a compliance nightmare. So that's what precipitated that bill. But yeah, that's HB 2595. I think it passed out of committee favorably. There wasn't much objection to that.
Let me go with just one last question, and then we'll go into closing comments. And I'll read this. KORA, K-O-R-A, for 501c3s, 501c6s, nonprofits, are not subject to KORA. If these accept taxpayer funds, taxpayer funds, should they be subject to KORA? Does anyone here have anything to address on this issue?
I think as far as transparency is concerned, that's probably not a bad idea to research. It'd be worthy of a hearing and looking into it to find out what the consequences are of doing something like that. I guess I've never really thought about it, so I would leave it at that.
Not being real familiar with that, I think it would certainly, I have to agree that having a hearing and knowing the proponents and opponents and consequences and benefits, I think I would have to go along with that.
And just thinking of a couple of examples where I'd really like to see that information and data shared, I haven't thought through all of the possible implications of forcing that on everybody. So I'd have to go through that process to say, yeah, I'd like that to happen, other than I'd like it to happen to 2 or 3 organizations. So thank you.
Okay, we're getting close to 10 o'clock, so we'll open it up for closing comments from each of our legislators. So,
Well, thank you, and
Johnson.
thanks again to everyone for being here. Thanks for your questions, and I'll look forward to your dialogue as we leave here and continue through the session and into our next meeting. Katie did say she couldn't be here today, but did plan on being at the other events from AT&T, so we'll look forward to saying thanks to her in person in the future ones that we have. I am lucky to have a great intern this year, Jonathan Pushin from down to this area. I've had a few great interns and a couple that have been from the area, which has been great. I always look very much forward to when I'm lucky enough to have Pages or other folks that come through. Their energy is always great to get to have, and I look forward to spending a few minutes with them. And it is a pleasure just to go around the Capitol and see our building. That is one of the best things of the job, is just getting to be there. I think many of you have made it, but swing by there sometime and enjoy the Visitors Center and things that have been built for us over the 150 years that Kansas has been around. And other than that, thanks for your questions, and I look forward to continuing to work on the issues.
Thank you. This is marvelous to see this many people here today, that you're interested, you're advocates for good legislation, and I really appreciate and applaud you for being here. And thank you so much for the questions. Some of them were pretty tough. It's been one of the things that I enjoy the most is just this past week, the 4-H'ers were there, and I met a lot of the 4-H'ers. Being on the Ag Committee, it was really great. We had one young lady that had horses, and her and I got into a conversation. I've always been a horse enthusiast. I've never been able to have one, and at this point, it would take a crane to get me into a saddle. So I guess my adventure of owning a horse has gone by. But I had some really great kids as pages this last couple of weeks. Adian Pilcher from Sacred Heart Middle School, he was the only page that day. And the governor wasn't there, so in the ceremony room where they take the pictures of the pages, he was able to sit in the governor's chair, and he just thought that was marvelous. And I have a picture of him. He just thought he was king of the hill. Then I also had pages from Lakewood Middle School, Kathleen Rhodes, Madeline Sears, and Madeline Paradis. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Just wonderful kids. And I always, whether I want it or not, I always push my page button and ask them to get me a cup of water. And usually they come up with a regular styrofoam cup, but oftentimes they come up with just the cone. So I'm forced to sit there with that cone water while I'm trying to do great legislation. But it really, it's a people's house, and this is the way it should be. And yesterday they had, yesterday, the gallery was full of individuals really seeing what's going on in the people's house. And just remember, it is your house, no matter what your age is. And thank you again so much for being here today.
I'll echo the thanks to the Chamber, AT&T, and of course Dale for moderating today. I did forget something. Oh, and while we're doing shout-outs to interns and everything, Sam Unruh is my intern this year here from Salina, and he's doing a fantastic job. He's over at Washburn, and he comes in on Wednesdays, does great work there. I did forget to mention the Water Consumer Protection Act. You may have noticed that up Howison Heights, once again, is under a boil order, and that has been an ongoing issue for years that we've been attempting to address using the KCC and the Citizen Utility Ratepayers Board, and I've introduced the Water Consumer Protection Act. It's HB 2657 if you want to look that up on kslegislature.org. But that would require private utilities like what's going on up there at Howison Heights to have a bond and to be insured and have dollars in place. So if they were to go bankrupt, there would be some dollars to continue operating the system and providing some level of service quality to those who are being served by the water district. So trying to solve that problem, it's a long ongoing process, but we do have a bill in place that could get some traction and start helping those folks out up there. But I'll just close with that, and again, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Our next legislative issues meeting will be Saturday, March 19th, so put that on your calendar. It'll be the same time, same place. I want to thank each of our legislators for being here today. I'd like to encourage all of you for asking very good questions. There were a number of questions we didn't get to. I tried to group some of them to cover the topics, but please, maybe our legislators will be here so you could ask them directly if we did miss one of those. So again, thank you to AT&T for sponsoring, and we are adjourned.